The champagne flutes clinked around me like wind chimes made of crystal and old money, a sound I'd never quite gotten used to despite attending these events for the past 3 years. I stood in the back corner of the Rothschild Gallery, clutching my auction paddle with white knuckles, trying to blend into the silk wallpaper, while women in Chanel and men in custom Tom Ford circulated through the space like sharks sensing blood in the water. My dress was professional enough, a simple black sheath I'd owned since graduate school, but next to the glittering crowd it felt like showing up to the Met Gala in a rental tux. Rain had started to fall outside, streaking the floor to ceiling windows that overlooked Fifth Avenue, the drops catching the light from the chandeliers and creating patterns that slid down the glass like tears. I checked my phone for the third time in 10 minutes, refreshing my email to see if my client had responded with approval to go higher than our agreed maximum bid. Nothing. The painting I'd come for, a small but exquisite Madonna and Child, attributed to a lesser-known student of Raphael, sat on an easel at the front of the room, its damaged corner practically screaming for the restoration work that was my specialty. The auction house estimated it would go for 60 to 80,000, and my client, a private collector in Boston, had authorized me to bid up to 90. It was a good commission, one my struggling firm desperately needed, and I'd already mentally allocated the fee toward the most pressing of our creditors. The auctioneer, a silver-haired man with the crisp accent of old Manhattan money, began the bidding at 40,000. My paddle went up immediately, along with 3 others scattered throughout the room. 50,000, 60,000. The other bidders dropped out one by one until it was just me and someone in the back of the room I couldn't quite see. 70,000. I raised my paddle, feeling sweat prickle along my spine despite the gallery's perfect climate control. 80,000. The other bidder's paddle rose, held by a man partially obscured by a marble column. 90,000. I was at my limit, but the painting was worth it, and my client would understand going slightly over if it meant securing the piece. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, ready to fall. Going once, going twice, 100,000. The voice came from the back, calm and unhurried, speaking the number like it meant nothing at all. I turned, finally getting a clear view of my competition, and my breath caught in a way that had nothing to do with losing the bid. He was younger than most of the collectors in the room, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that belonged on Italian cinema screens rather than in Manhattan auction houses. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, strong jaw, and eyes so dark they looked black from this distance. He wore his tuxedo like it was a second skin, perfectly tailored to shoulders that spoke of regular gym sessions rather than the soft wealth of inherited money. But it was the way he stood that struck me most, utterly still and completely aware, like a predator that didn't need to move because everything in the room would eventually come to him. 110,000. I said the number before I could stop myself, going 20,000 over my authorization, my voice sounding too loud in my own ears. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded, turning his attention back to the man in the rear. 120,000. No hesitation, no consideration, just a simple raising of his paddle, and those 2 words that dismissed my bid like it was pocket change. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't go higher. I absolutely could not go higher. My firm was already drowning in debt, already bleeding clients to larger restoration houses with better reputations and deeper pockets. This commission was supposed to help dig us out, not bury us deeper. But I found my paddle rising anyway, my mouth opening to say 130,000 when my phone buzzed in my clutch. I fumbled it out, seeing my business partner's text in all caps. Do not go over 90, we cannot afford it. The gavel fell. Sold for $120,000 to bidder 73. The auctioneer's voice seemed to come from very far away as I stood there, my paddle half raised in an aborted bid, watching the man in the back lower his own paddle with a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. a smile that was somehow aimed directly at me despite the distance between us. The rest of the auction passed in a blur of resentment and financial anxiety. I stayed because leaving early would look unprofessional, because someone might remember that I'd bid aggressively on a painting I didn't get, and in the art world, perception was everything. But I couldn't focus on the remaining lots, couldn't muster interest in a Flemish still life or a collection of Ming Dynasty ceramics. My mind kept circling back to the Madonna, to the restoration work I'd planned, to the commission fee that would now go to someone else. When the auction finally ended, the crowd dispersed toward the adjoining gallery where the auction house had set up a reception. I should have left, should have called my partner and broken the bad news, then gone home to my studio apartment and the instant ramen that had become my primary food group. Instead, I found myself pushing through the well-dressed bodies toward the back of the room, toward where I'd last seen the man who'd outbid me. I spotted him near one of the windows, his back to the room as he gazed out at the rain-streaked Manhattan skyline. Up close, he was even more striking than he'd appeared from a distance. Tall, easily 6'2" to my 5'6", with the kind of presence that created a bubble of space around him even in the crowded gallery. No one stood too close, I noticed. No one approached him casually. He radiated something that made people keep their distance, an invisible barrier of power or danger or both. "Excuse me." My voice came out sharper than I'd intended, fueled by frustration and financial desperation. He turned slowly, and I got my first clear look at his face. Strong features that fell just short of pretty, saved from beauty by a nose that had been broken at least once, and a small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. But his eyes... God, his eyes were extraordinary. Not black as I'd thought from a distance, but the deepest brown I'd ever seen. So dark the pupil nearly disappeared into the iris. Eyes that looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. Yes. His voice matched his appearance, deep and slightly accented in a way I couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, or somewhere in the Mediterranean. That painting. I gestured vaguely toward the front of the gallery where the auction staff was already wrapping and processing sales. The Madonna. Did you buy it because you actually want it? Or just because you could? A smile curved his lips, transforming his face from striking to devastating. Does it matter? Yes. No. I don't know. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how confrontational I sounded, how unprofessional. That was an important acquisition for my firm. We specialize in Renaissance restoration, and that piece needed significant work, the kind of work I'm particularly qualified to do. He studied me with those unnerving eyes, his gaze traveling from my face down to my auction paddle, which I still clutched like a weapon. Isabel Moreno. It wasn't a question. He knew my name. Of course he did. Anyone serious about art collection would have researched the other bidders, especially on a contested lot. Yes, I do restoration work. My firm, Moreno Conservation, we've worked with several major museums and private collectors. If you're interested in having the painting properly restored, I'd love to provide you with a quote. I'm well aware of your work. He slipped one hand into his pocket, the gesture casual but somehow calculated. I'm also aware of your firm's financial situation. $340,000 in outstanding debts to various creditors, current accounts receivable of approximately $62,000, and a lease on your studio space that comes up for renewal in 6 weeks. You've lost 4 major clients in the past year to Ashford Restoration, and your insurance premiums have tripled after that incident with the water damage at the Morgan Library. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with precision in the soft, vulnerable places I tried to keep hidden. My face flamed hot, then cold. Who are you? Dante Vitale. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His palm was warm and dry, his grip firm without being crushing. I'm a collector of beautiful things, Miss Moreno. Art, antiquities, rare books, and occasionally people with particular talents. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. I'm not interested in whatever you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Your firm is drowning. You took on too much overhead when you expanded last year, counted on clients who didn't materialize, and now you're 3 months from bankruptcy. That painting you were bidding on, the commission from Bernard Hastings in Boston, that was supposed to keep you afloat another quarter. Anger surged through me, hot and clarifying. You bought it just to, what? Prove you could? To drive up the price? To sabotage my business? I bought it because you wanted it. He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And because I wanted to see what you'd do when you didn't get it. Would you walk away quietly or would you confront me? His smile widened fractionally. I'm pleased you chose confrontation. You're insane. I took a step back, suddenly very aware that the crowd around us had thinned, that we were relatively isolated in this corner of the gallery. And I'm leaving. Wait. He didn't move, didn't reach for me, but something in his voice made me pause. I have a proposition for you. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. I don't need to. I know your type. Rich men who think everything and everyone has a price. Well, I'm not for sale. Everyone has a price, Miss Moreno. The trick is finding what currency they value. For some people it's money. For others, it's security, legacy, or the opportunity to do work they're passionate about without financial constraints. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was one of the paintings on the wall. What's yours? My hands clenched into fists at my sides. You can't buy me. I already have. The words dropped into the space between us like stones into still water. What? I bought your firm's debt. All of it. As of this morning, every creditor you owe money to has sold their paper to a holding company I control, which means you don't work for Bernard Hastings anymore, or the Morgan Library, or any of your other clients. You work for me. The room tilted slightly, my vision tunneling. That's not. You can't just. I can. And I did. He pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket and held it out to me. This is a contract. You'll provide exclusive restoration services to my collection for a period of 1 year. In exchange, your firm's debts are forgiven, you'll receive a monthly stipend of $20,000, and at the end of the year, if your work is satisfactory, I'll provide you with enough capital to reestablish your business on solid financial footing. I didn't take the contract. I couldn't make my hands move, couldn't process what he was saying. You're buying me, like I'm some kind of indentured servant. Employee is the term I'd use. Call it whatever you want. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and understated with notes of cedar and citrus. You can't make me love you. The words came out of nowhere, born from some deep well of defiance I didn't know I possessed. You can't buy people's affection or loyalty. You can't force someone to care about you just because you throw money at them. For a long moment he simply looked at me, and I saw something flicker in those fathomless eyes. Surprise, maybe, or interest, or something darker I couldn't name. Then he leaned down, bringing his face level with mine, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. Watch me. His voice was barely above a whisper, intimate and absolute. I don't need your love, Miss Moreno. Just your time, your talent, and your complete cooperation. But make no mistake, by the time our year is done, you'll give me all 3 willingly. He straightened, tucking the contract back into his pocket when I still didn't take it. A car will pick you up at your studio tomorrow morning at 9. Bring whatever tools and materials you'll need for an extended stay. My estate is in the Hudson Valley, about 90 minutes north of the city. I stood frozen as he turned and walked away, his form disappearing into the remaining clusters of auction-goers like a shark sliding back into dark water. Around me, the gallery continued its evening routine, staff members carefully wrapping purchases, guests sipping champagne and discussing art with the casual knowledge of people for whom $60,000 was lunch money. Rain continued to streak the windows, the city lights beyond creating halos in the water droplets. My phone buzzed. My business partner, asking how the auction went. I looked down at it, then back up at the space where Dante Vitale had stood, where he'd casually informed me he'd bought my entire professional life and expected me to simply accept it. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was illegal, that I should call a lawyer, that no one could simply purchase another person's debts and demand servitude in exchange for forgiveness. But the desperate part, the part that woke up at 3 in the morning calculating how many months until complete financial collapse, that part whispered that maybe this was the answer I'd been looking for. Maybe this was survival. I typed out a response to my partner, "We need to talk." Lost the bid, but something else came up. "I'll explain tomorrow." Then I walked to the coat check, claimed my second-hand trench coat, and stepped out into the rain-soaked Manhattan night. Behind me, through the glowing windows of the Rothschild Gallery, I could see the wrapped Madonna and Child being loaded onto a cart, headed for a new home in the collection of a man who had just bought me along with it. The rain was cold against my face, mixing with something that might have been tears or might have been just water. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd figure this out, that I'd find a way to take his money and his debt, forgiveness without giving him anything more than professional competence. But even as I thought it, I could still feel the ghost of his breath against my cheek, could still hear his voice wrapping around those two words like a promise and a threat. Watch me. Section 2. The Gilded Cage and Family Secrets. The car that picked me up at 9 sharp was a black Mercedes, with windows tinted so dark I couldn't see out, which felt appropriate given that I was apparently being transported to my own elegant prison. The driver was silent, a man in his 50s with the build of someone who'd done violence professionally, and he loaded my supplies into the trunk with efficient movements that suggested he'd handled far more dangerous cargo than restoration equipment and archival materials. I sat in the back seat clutching my phone, watching the city give way to suburbs, and then to the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley, trying to convince myself I could still turn back, still call the police, still find some way out of the trap that had closed around me the moment Dante Vitale bought my debts and my future. But I didn't make the call, and 90 minutes later, the car turned onto a private road that wound through towering oaks and maples just beginning to show their autumn colors. The estate revealed itself gradually, like a secret being unwillingly disclosed. First, the wall, at least 12 feet of weathered stone, topped with security cameras, disguised as decorative finials. Then the gate, wrought iron worked into patterns that looked medieval but were probably installed last year. And finally, the house itself, a sprawling Italian villa that looked like it had been transplanted directly from Tuscany, all honey-colored stone and terracotta tiles and arched windows that caught the morning light. It was beautiful in the way that extremely expensive things are beautiful, perfect and cold and utterly inhuman. The car stopped in a circular driveway centered by a fountain depicting Neptune wrestling a sea serpent, and I stepped out into air that smelled of cut grass and late-blooming roses, and something else I couldn't identify. Something that felt like the aftermath of violence even though nothing around me suggested anything but peace. A woman in her 60s, dressed in what I recognized as a housekeeper's uniform updated for the 21st century, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Moreno, welcome. I'm Mrs. Chen. I manage the household staff. Mr. Vitale is waiting for you in the gallery." She gestured toward the house, and I followed her through a marble foyer that could have swallowed my entire studio apartment, past rooms filled with antique furniture and modern art, down a hallway lined with what I was fairly certain were genuine Piranesi prints. We stopped at a set of double doors carved with scenes from Dante's Inferno, which felt a little too on the nose given my host's name. Mrs. Chen opened them without knocking, and I stepped into a space that made my breath catch, despite my determination to remain unimpressed. The gallery was enormous, easily 5,000 square feet, with a vaulted ceiling fitted with track lighting that could be adjusted to illuminate specific pieces. The walls were covered in museum-quality fabric, a neutral gray that wouldn't compete with the artwork, and the floor was polished hardwood that gleamed under the carefully calibrated lights. Temperature and humidity controls hummed softly from hidden vents, maintaining the perfect environment for preserving priceless art. And the paintings. Oh God, the paintings. I recognized the first one immediately, a Vermeer that had been reported stolen from a private collection in Amsterdam 15 years ago. The Girl with the Wine Glass, worth at least $40 million, hanging on Dante Vitale's wall like it belonged there. My heart started hammering against my ribs as I moved deeper into the gallery, my trained eye cataloging piece after piece that shouldn't exist outside of museums or Interpol's stolen art database. A Caravaggio that was supposed to have been destroyed in a fire in Naples. A Rembrandt self-portrait that had disappeared from a Berlin gallery during World War II. A Raphael Madonna that I'd written a paper about in graduate school, describing it as lost to history. They weren't lost. They were here, in this climate-controlled tomb, being hoarded by a man who clearly had no intention of ever sharing them with the world. I stopped in front of the Caravaggio, a brutal depiction of Judith beheading Holofernes, the paint so luminous it seemed to glow from within. My hands trembled with the urge to touch it, to examine the brushwork up close, to lose myself in the technical mastery of an artist who'd been dead for 400 years. But I forced myself to step back, to turn away, to face the man who'd been watching me from the shadows at the far end of the gallery. Impressive, isn't it? Dante emerged into the light, dressed more casually than he'd been at the auction, in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The informal clothing should have made him seem less intimidating, but somehow it had the opposite effect, revealing the muscled forearms and the way he moved with the coiled energy of someone always ready for violence. You're looking at approximately $200 million in stolen art. This is insane. My voice came out hoarse, shocked. Do you have any idea what the FBI would do if they knew about this? What Interpol would do? You could go to prison for the rest of your life. He smiled, unbothered by the threat. Could I? That assumes someone would report it. That assumes you would report it, Miss Moreno. And I don't think you will. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with adrenaline and righteous fury. Watch me. I started to dial, but he closed the distance between us in 3 long strides and plucked the phone from my hand with movements too fast to follow. He didn't hurt me, didn't even touch me beyond taking the phone, but suddenly he was in my space, towering over me, and I felt the full weight of how physically outmatched I was. I wouldn't do that if I were you. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Not before you understand exactly what you'd be destroying. Give me back my phone. No. He slipped it into his pocket. Not until you've seen everything. Not until you understand your father's role in building this collection. My father. I stepped back, putting distance between us, even though it felt like retreat. My father was an art dealer, a legitimate art dealer who worked with museums and universities and private collectors. He would never. Read it yourself. Dante walked to a desk in the corner of the gallery, opened a drawer, and pulled out a leather-bound journal I recognized instantly. My father's handwriting on the cover, his name embossed in gold. Miguel Moreno, Private Records. That's not. Where did you get that? From him. From your father, who kept meticulous notes of every transaction he made on behalf of my family. He held it out to me, and after a moment of paralysis, I took it. The leather was worn smooth from handling, and when I opened it, the pages crackled with the particular sound of expensive paper aging gracefully. Page 47. Dante's voice came from somewhere above me, detached and clinical. The Caravaggio you believed was donated to the Met. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see my father's handwriting describing something that would shatter everything I believed about him. But my hands turned the pages anyway, Joudao page 47, and there it was. October 12th. Completed transaction with Antonio Vitale. The Caravaggio. Judith beheading Holofernes. Provenance established through forged documentation tracing it to a private Spanish collection destroyed during the Civil War. Purchase price? $2.3 million. Commission? $230,000. AV pleased with the acquisition. Asked about other Italian Baroque possibilities. The words swam in front of my eyes. My father's handwriting, distinctive and familiar, the same hand that had written birthday cards and notes on my college papers and shopping lists stuck to the refrigerator. My father, describing the sale of stolen art like it was a normal business transaction, describing his commission like it was payment for honest work. No. I looked up at Dante, who watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes. No. This is a forgery. You had someone copy his handwriting. My father would never. Keep reading. His voice was implacable. Page 62, page 98, page 134. Your father worked for my family for almost 20 years, Miss Moreno. He was very good at his job, very discreet, very reliable. Until he started having second thoughts. I flipped through the pages, each entry a small death. Sales to the Vitale family. Authentication of pieces my father knew were stolen. Advice on how to move. Artwork through international markets without triggering law enforcement attention. And worse, so much worse, were the personal entries scattered between the business records. Notes about me. Isabel accepted to Colombia. So proud. Hope this work with the Vitales ends soon so I can retire and spend more time with family. And later. Isabel graduating next spring. Want to be there without this hanging over me. Need to find a way out. The journal shook in my hands. I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes but refused to let them fall, refused to show weakness in front of this man who'd orchestrated this entire revelation like a performance designed to break me. Why? My voice cracked on the word. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what you're part of. Dante took the journal from my trembling hands and set it gently on a nearby table. Your father made choices, Miss Moreno. He made them for understandable reasons. He was young when he started working for my family, ambitious, wanted to build something significant in the art world. The Vitales offered him opportunities he couldn't get legitimately. Introductions to collectors, access to pieces that never came on the market, money to establish his reputation. By the time he realized how deep he was, by the time he wanted out, it was too late. Tears were sliding down my face now, hot and bitter. You killed him. The car accident. That wasn't an accident. Dante's expression shifted, something that might have been regret flickering across his features before his mask settled back into place. Your father's death wasn't an accident. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, you need to decide what you're going to do with this information. I wiped at my tears with the back of my hand, anger rising through the grief like flames through smoke. I'm going to the police. I'm going to tell them everything. My father, your collection, all of it. And then you'll destroy his legacy. Dante walked to the Caravaggio, stood looking up at Judith's face as she sawed through Holofernes' neck with cold determination. You'll make him into a criminal, someone who betrayed the art world's trust for money. You'll implicate your mother, who spent years enjoying the lifestyle your father's illicit income provided. The house she still lives in, the one he bought 15 years ago with money from the Vitales. The art collection she inherited, half of which has questionable provenance. She's innocent. She didn't know. Prove it. He turned back to me, and his face was pitiless. You think the authorities will care about the distinction? You think they won't seize everything she owns, drag her through investigations and depositions and public humiliation? Your father's name will be synonymous with corruption. Every museum he worked with will have to reevaluate their collections, wondering what else he sold them that was stolen or forged. His life's work will mean nothing except as a cautionary tale. I felt the trap closing around me with perfect precision, every exit blocked, every escape route sealed. You bastard! Yes. He acknowledged it without shame. I am. But I'm also offering you a choice. Work for me. Restore the pieces in my collection that genuinely need restoration, not because they're stolen, but because they're damaged by age or mishandling. Do the work you're brilliant at, the work your father taught you to love. In exchange, his secrets stay secret. Your mother keeps her home and her peace. And you get to preserve these masterpieces that would otherwise deteriorate in storage or be destroyed by people who don't understand their value. And if I refuse, then I release your father's journals to the FBI, to Interpol, to every major museum and art publication in the world. I let them tear apart his legacy and your mother's life. I make sure everyone knows that Isabel Moreno is the daughter of a criminal, that everything you've accomplished professionally is tainted by association. You'll never work in art restoration again. No museum will touch you. No private collector will trust you. Your career will be as dead as your father. The cruelty of it, the calculated manipulation, made me want to scream. Instead, I looked around the gallery, at the priceless artwork held captive by a man who valued possession over beauty, at my own reflection distorted in the protective glass covering a Rembrandt. I saw myself fractured and multiplied, a woman trapped in a gilded cage of her father's making. Why are you doing this? My voice was barely above a whisper. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just hire any conservator? You could pay someone a fortune and they'd never ask questions. Because I can. He said it simply, like it was the only reason he needed. Because you have a gift, inherited from a father who understood art in ways most people never will. Because He stopped, something flickering behind his eyes that looked almost like vulnerability. But it was gone before I could identify it, replaced by the cold certainty I was beginning to recognize as his default state. Because this is the deal I'm offering. Take it or leave it. But decide now. I thought of my mother, alone in the house my father bought with blood money. Thought of his grave in the cemetery where I visited every month, where I talked to him about my work and my struggles and my dreams. Thought of the journals sitting on the table, evidence of betrayals I couldn't reconcile with the man who'd taught me to see beauty in a brushstroke, who'd held my hand through museums when I was a child, and told me stories about the artists who'd created miracles from pigment and canvas. And I thought of the Caravaggio behind Dante, Judith's face set in grim determination as she did what needed to be done to save her people. Sometimes survival required compromise. Sometimes it required becoming someone you never thought you'd be. I'll do it. The words felt like surrender and defiance in equal measure. I'll restore your collection, but I want the journals. All of them. I want to read everything my father wrote. Dante nodded slowly. Agreed. You can have them tonight. Anything else? I want to know what really happened to him. You said his death wasn't an accident. I want the truth. Eventually. His eyes were hard, uncompromising. When I'm certain you won't do something foolish with the information. When I can trust you. Trust. I laughed, the sound harsh and broken. You've blackmailed me into working for you by threatening to destroy my father's memory and my mother's life. How exactly do you expect me to trust you? I don't. His honesty was almost refreshing in its brutality. But I expect you to be smart enough to recognize when cooperation serves your interests. And right now, keeping your father's secrets, preserving your mother's happiness, and doing work you're passionate about without financial stress. All of that serves your interests better than rebellion. He was right. I hated that he was right. Hated him for being right. Hated myself for accepting it. But he was right. I looked around the gallery one more time, at the stolen masterpieces that would be my prison and my purpose for the foreseeable future. Fine. Show me what needs restoration. Where are my supplies? Where will I be working? Mrs. Chen will show you to your workspace and your quarters. Dante pulled my phone from his pocket and held it out. I've removed the ability to make calls or access the internet from anywhere on the estate. You can have it back with full functionality when I'm confident you won't use it to destroy everything I've built. I took the phone, felt its useless weight in my hand. A security detail will accompany you any time you leave the grounds, which will be rarely. You'll have everything you need here. I provide meals, supplies, whatever equipment you require. In return, I expect 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Sundays you may do as you please, within reason. You're a prisoner, a well-compensated employee with limited freedom of movement. He smiled, and there was something almost sad in it. Welcome to the family business, Miss Moreno. Your father would be proud. The words hit me like a physical blow. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I grabbed the nearest object, a ornate 15th century frame sitting on a restoration table, and hurled it at his head. He dodged easily, the frame sailing past him and clattering against the wall. Instantly, the doors burst open and 2 men rushed in, both armed, both moving to intercept me. But Dante held up a hand, stopping them. "It's fine. Leave us." "But sir," I said, "leave us." His voice carried absolute authority, and the guards retreated, though I could feel their presence just outside the doors. Dante looked at the frame on the floor, then back at me, and something like approval flickered across his face. Good. He picked up the frame, examined it for damage, set it back on the table. I was beginning to worry you'd just accept everything passively. This is better. Spirit is useful, as long as you remember where to direct it. I was shaking with rage and grief and helplessness. I hate you. I know. He straightened his shirt, utterly unruffled by the assault. But you'll work for me anyway. You'll restore my collection. You'll keep your father's secrets. And eventually, you'll understand why this is better than any alternative you're imagining. I wanted to throw something else, wanted to rage and break things until the beautiful gallery was as shattered as my understanding of my father. But Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, patient and impassive, waiting to show me to my prison. I followed her out, leaving Dante standing among his stolen treasures, and didn't look back. But I felt his eyes on me the entire way, watching, calculating, planning whatever move came next in this game I hadn't known I was playing until I'd already lost. Section 3. Proximity and Unwanted Chemistry. The guest house was beautiful in the way that places designed by expensive architects and decorated by people with unlimited budgets are always beautiful, which is to say it was absolutely soulless. I moved in on a Tuesday morning, carrying my personal belongings in 2 suitcases and a backpack, everything I owned that mattered fitting into luggage I could theoretically grab and run with if I ever found an opportunity to escape. Mrs. Chen had prepared the space with military efficiency, fresh flowers on the kitchen counter, the refrigerator stocked with items I recognized from my grocery lists at home, which meant Dante had been watching me long before the auction, long before I'd known his name. The bedroom had a king-sized bed with sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and the bathroom had one of those showers with jets coming from 6 different directions and a soaking tub deep enough to drown in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens, currently ablaze with autumn color, and in the distance I could see the main house, a constant reminder that I was living in my captor's pocket. I unpacked methodically, establishing routines because routines were control, and control was the only thing I had left. Morning coffee at 6. Review the day's restoration tasks by 7. In the studio by 8. Work until exhaustion made continuing dangerous, usually around 8 or 9 at night. Return to the guest house, eat whatever Mrs. Chen had left in warming containers, read my father's journals until the words blurred, and I couldn't stand to learn anything else about the man I'd thought I knew. Then sleep poorly, and start again. The studio Dante had created for me was in a converted conservatory attached to the main house, all glass walls and north-facing light that any conservator would kill for. He'd equipped it with everything I could possibly need, and several things I'd only ever dreamed of owning. A stereo microscope that cost more than a car, pigment analysis equipment, climate-controlled storage for works in progress, and a sound system that filled the space with whatever music I chose. I worked to Bach mostly, the mathematical precision of his compositions helping me focus on the equally precise work of cleaning centuries of grime from priceless paintings. I'd established boundaries on my second day, standing in Dante's study while he sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents I assumed related to whatever legitimate businesses fronted his criminal empire. Professional communication only, I'd told him, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'll provide weekly progress reports on the restoration work. If I need supplies or have questions about a specific piece, I'll submit requests in writing. No personal conversations, no shared meals, no questions about my life or my father, or anything that isn't directly related to the work. He'd looked up from his papers, those dark eyes traveling over me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. That seems excessive. These are my terms, I'd said. If you want me to do quality work, I need to maintain professional distance. Interesting. He'd leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. And if I don't agree to these terms, then we'll see how well I can restore paintings while actively sabotaging them. The smile had widened into something that looked almost like genuine amusement. Very well, Miss Moreno. Professional distance it is. I'll do my best to respect your boundaries. The problem was that Dante's best was deliberately, infuriatingly inadequate. He appeared in my studio at least once a day, always with some excuse that was transparently false. Checking on a painting's progress, asking my opinion on a frame design, wondering if the temperature controls were set to my satisfaction. He never stayed long, never pushed too hard, but his presence disrupted my concentration in ways I couldn't afford. I'd be lost in the delicate work of removing old varnish from a Titian, the world narrowing to just the painting and my tools and the smell of solvents, and then I'd feel him watching me, and everything else would snap back into focus. The way he moved through the studio like he owned it, which of course he did. The way he looked at the paintings with genuine appreciation, not just as trophies or investments, but as works of beauty. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, with an expression I couldn't quite read, but that made something low in my stomach tighten, with awareness I absolutely did not want to feel. He asked personal questions disguised as professional interest. This Vermeer, you're cleaning it with unusual caution, even for you. Is there a particular reason? My father taught me that Northern European paintings from this period often have fragile glazes that can lift if you're too aggressive with solvents. I'd keep my eyes on my work, not looking at him. Ah, your father, he must have been an excellent teacher. I don't want to discuss my father with you. Understood. But the seed was planted, the memory invoked, and I'd spend the rest of the day thinking about my father's hands guiding mine on a brush when I was 12, teaching me to see the layers in a painting the way a geologist sees strata in stone. Dinners appeared in my guest house every evening at 7, always set for 2 despite my explicit instructions that I'd eat alone. Mrs. Chen would arrive with covered dishes, set them on the dining table, and say Mr. Vitale thought you might enjoy company this evening, before disappearing back to the main house. I never invited him in, but sometimes I'd find him on my porch anyway, sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs that overlooked the gardens, a glass of wine in his hand, and another waiting for me on the small table between the chairs. I'd ignore him, take my plate inside, eat while reading restoration journals, or my father's increasingly painful confessions. But I was always aware of him out there, a dark shape against the twilight, patient as stone. The security detail was the worst violation, two men who rotated shifts and followed me everywhere I went on the estate grounds. I need to walk to the main house to examine a painting in the gallery, and they'd materialize from wherever they'd been lurking. I want to sit in the garden and sketch ideas for a restoration approach, and they'd position themselves 20 feet away, close enough to intervene if I tried to run, but far enough to maintain the fiction that this was protection rather than imprisonment. I told Dante I didn't need guards. He'd smiled and said, "I disagree. The Calavieras know you're here now. I need to ensure my investment stays safe. Always investment. Always my work. Never me." But the way he looked at me contradicted his words, and I hated that I noticed, hated that some treacherous part of me responded to the attention. 3 weeks into my residency, I was working on the most delicate restoration yet, a small Madonna and Child by Filippo Lippi that had suffered water damage in some previous decade. The paint layer had separated from the panel in several places, creating bubbles and flakes that threatened to fall away entirely if I wasn't extraordinarily careful. I'd spent 2 days just examining the damage under magnification, planning my approach, and now I was ready to begin the actual consolidation work. The process required injecting tiny amounts of adhesive under the lifting paint, then applying gentle pressure to rebond it to the substrate. Steady hands were essential. Unfortunately, my hands were anything but steady. I'd had essential tremor since I was 20, a neurological condition that caused involuntary shaking, especially when I was stressed or tired or trying to do precision work. I'd learned to manage it over the years, timing my most delicate tasks for moments when the tremor was minimal, using ergonomic tools that required less fine motor control, taking breaks when I felt the shaking worsen. But the stress of the past few weeks had made it worse than it had been in years. And as I positioned my micro syringe to inject adhesive under a particularly fragile section of the Virgin's face, my hand began to tremble visibly. "Stop," I told myself, breathing slowly and deliberately. "Relax." The tremor increased, my entire hand shaking now, the syringe tip wobbling dangerously close to the paint surface. If I injected adhesive in the wrong place, I could cause irreparable damage to a 600-year-old masterpiece. I set the syringe down, closed my eyes, tried the relaxation techniques my neurologist had taught me. But I could feel the tremor spreading up my arm, could feel the familiar frustration and helplessness that came with my body refusing to obey my commands. "Let me help." Dante's voice came from directly behind me, so close I could feel the warmth of him against my back. I jerked in surprise, starting to turn, but his hand settled gently on my shoulders, holding me in place. "Don't move, just breathe." I should have told him to get away from me, should have reminded him of the professional boundaries he was systematically destroying, but his hands were warm through the thin fabric of my work shirt, and his presence behind me was solid and strangely comforting, and I was so tired of fighting everything alone. He reached around me, his chest pressing lightly against my back, and picked up the syringe I'd abandoned. "Show me where it needs to go." "I can't let you. You're not trained." "I'm not doing it. You are. I'm just providing stability." His right hand found mine, his palm sliding under my trembling fingers, his thumb pressing gently against my wrist. "Feel that? I'm not controlling your hand. I'm just supporting it. Try now." I picked up a clean syringe with my left hand, loaded it with adhesive the way I'd done 1,000 times before, then positioned it over the painting with Dante's hand steadying my right. The tremor was still there, I could feel it, but his presence dampened it, his solid strength compensating for my weakness. Together, we injected the adhesive exactly where it needed to go, the tiny amount of liquid sliding under the lifted paint with perfect precision. "Again," he said softly. his breath stirring my hair. Show me the next spot. We worked like that for 10 minutes. That felt like 10 hours. His body curved around mine, his hand supporting my tremor, our breathing falling into sync. I was aware of everything about him with excruciating clarity. The scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of linseed oil and turpentine, the controlled power in his frame, the sense that he could crush me without effort but chose gentleness instead. The way his thumb traced small circles against my wrist, a gesture that might have been unconscious but felt deliberately intimate. Heat was building between us, a tension that had nothing to do with the delicate restoration work and everything to do with the fact that I could feel every breath he took, could feel the hard planes of his chest against my shoulder blades, could feel something shifting in the careful distance I'd tried to maintain. The last injection went in perfectly, and I set down the syringe with a hand that was suddenly steadier than it had been in weeks. "Done," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "You can let go now." He didn't immediately release me. For a long moment, we stayed frozen, his hand still covering mine, his body still pressed against my back, and I felt the air between us thicken with possibility. Then he stepped away, and the loss of contact felt like cold water shocking my system back to awareness. I spun to face him, anger rising to cover the confusion and attraction I absolutely could not afford to feel. "What are you doing here? I told you I needed to work alone. You were struggling. I helped. That's not help, that's—" I gestured helplessly at the space where we'd been standing, at the painting that bore witness to our proximity. "That's a violation of my boundaries. Your boundaries were preventing you from doing your job." His face was maddeningly calm, but I saw something in his eyes, a heat that suggested he'd felt exactly what I'd felt and was no more comfortable with it than I was. I provided assistance, nothing more. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him that what just happened was anything but nothing, but as I gestured emphatically, my elbow caught the edge of the table where I'd set out my solvents. A bottle of turpentine tipped, spilling across the work surface in a clear, rushing stream. "No!" I lunged for it, trying to stop the flow before it reached the painting, but my feet tangled and I went down hard, landing on my knees on the studio floor. The turpentine kept spreading, dripping over the edge of the table, and Dante was there instantly, catching the bottle, righting it, grabbing clean rags to contain the spill. I scrambled to help him, both of us on the floor now, sopping up solvent before it could damage anything irreplaceable. Our hands collided, reaching for the same puddle, and we both froze. The touch was electric, his skin warm against mine, and when I looked up, he was closer than I'd realized, close enough that I could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that I could count his eyelashes if I wanted to, which I absolutely did not. We stayed like that, kneeling on the studio floor, surrounded by the chemical smell of turpentine. And something passed between us that I didn't have words for. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement of the attraction we were both trying to deny. The understanding that proximity was doing exactly what he'd intended it to do, breaking down my resistance one careful touch at a time. I scrambled backward, putting distance between us, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You need to leave. Isabel. Don't." I stood up, wrapping my arms around myself like I could hold in the traitorous warmth spreading through my chest. "Don't call me that. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. You're manipulating me. You're using my father's secrets and my financial desperation, and now this chemistry or whatever it is, to make me compliant." He rose to his feet with fluid grace, his expression shifting to something harder. "Is it working?" The question hung in the air between us, honest and brutal. I wanted to say no, wanted to tell him that nothing he did would make me forget that he was a criminal who'd blackmailed me into servitude. But I could still feel the ghost of his hand on mine, could still feel the safety of having someone steady me when my own body betrayed me, and the lie wouldn't come. Get out, I said instead. Just get out. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. As you wish. But as he walked toward the studio door, he paused. Your tremor. How long have you had it? None of your business. It's affecting your work, which affects my collection, which makes it my business. I have it under control. Clearly you don't. He turned back to face me, and his expression was thoughtful rather than accusatory. There are medications that can help. I've tried everything available in the US. Nothing works well enough without side effects that make restoration work impossible. What if I told you there are treatments available elsewhere? Experimental medications not yet approved by the FDA, but showing promising results in European trials. I'd say you're trying to fix me like I'm one of your damaged paintings. I don't need fixing. I need you to respect my boundaries and leave me alone. He didn't argue, just inclined his head and left, pulling the studio door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than slamming it would have. I stood there in the afternoon light, surrounded by priceless art and the smell of turpentine, and tried to convince myself that the heat still pooling in my stomach was anger rather than desire. That night, I returned to the guest house exhausted and emotionally wrung out, wanting nothing more than to take a scalding shower and fall into bed. But when I entered my bedroom, there was a package on my nightstand, wrapped in plain brown paper. I opened it with trembling fingers, already knowing what it would be. Inside was a bottle of medication I recognized from my research, a tremor treatment available in Switzerland that had shown remarkable efficacy but hadn't yet completed the FDA approval process. The label was in German and French, the prescription made out to me, and tucked underneath was a note in Dante's precise handwriting. For your work. Nothing more. I sank onto the bed, holding the bottle like it was something precious and dangerous in equal measure. The medication was expensive, almost impossible to obtain without the right connections, and represented months of tremor-free restoration work if it performed as the study suggested. He'd seen my vulnerability, and instead of exploiting it, he'd tried to eliminate it. Stop trying to be kind, I said to the empty room, to the ghost of his presence that seemed to linger everywhere on this estate. It won't work. But I opened the bottle anyway, read the dosage instructions, took the first pill with water from the bathroom sink, and as I lay in bed that night, watching shadows from the garden trees play across my ceiling, I repeated the words like a mantra. I can't want him. I won't. But my body remembered the solid warmth of him against my back, and my hand remembered the steadiness of his touch, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, I admitted what I couldn't say aloud. It was already too late. Section 4. The Rival Threat and Protective Instinct. 3 weeks into my captivity, which Dante insisted on calling employment, I'd fallen into a routine that felt almost normal if I didn't think too hard about the armed guards, or the stolen masterpieces, or the fact that I was essentially a prisoner with expensive art supplies. I worked 12 hours a day in the climate-controlled gallery, carefully removing centuries of grime and overpainting from a Titian that had been hidden in a private collection since 1943, and I tried not to think about my father's journals, which I read every night until the words blurred together into a narrative of compromise and regret that felt too much like looking into a mirror. Dante had approved a supply run to Manhattan, to a specialized art conservation supplier on the Lower East Side that carried the specific grades of rabbit skin glue and mineral spirits I needed for the next phase of restoration. I should have been suspicious that he was letting me leave the estate, even with guards, but I was so desperate for a glimpse of the city, for proof that the world beyond the walls still existed, that I didn't question it. The Mercedes picked me up at 8 in the morning, the same silent driver as always, but this time accompanied by 2 additional men in a second vehicle. Marco, the head of Dante's security, sat in the passenger seat, his presence making it clear this wasn't a casual errand. We'd been on the road for maybe 40 minutes, just entering the upper reaches of Manhattan, when Marco's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for 3 seconds, and said one word. Incoming. Everything happened at once. The driver accelerated hard, throwing me back against the leather seat. Marco barked orders into his phone while simultaneously pulling a handgun from a shoulder holster I hadn't known he was wearing. Behind us, I heard the screech of tires and turned to see a black SUV pulling alongside our car, its windows rolling down, to reveal men with weapons I only recognized from movies. "Get down!" Marco's hand shot back and shoved my head below the window line, just as the first gunshots shattered the morning. The sound was nothing like films make it seem. Louder, sharper. Each shot a physical assault on my eardrums. Glass exploded inward, raining down on me in 1,000 glittering pieces. I heard our driver curse in Italian, felt the car swerve violently as he tried to evade whoever was shooting at us. My hands were over my head, my body curled into the footwell, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process that this was actually happening. More gunfire, this time from Marco and the driver, returning fire through the shattered windows. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the car. Someone was screaming, a high sustained note that I dimly realized was coming from a pedestrian on the sidewalk as our car mounted the curb and sideswiped a row of parked vehicles. Metal shrieked against metal. A car alarm started wailing. "We're 2 blocks from the penthouse." The driver's voice was eerily calm despite the chaos. "I can get us there." "Do it." Marco twisted in his seat, still firing at our pursuers. "Where the hell is our backup vehicle?" "Took a hit. Down." The driver ran a red light, barely missing a delivery truck. "We need to move now." The next 60 seconds were a blur of violence and speed. Our car careened through Manhattan traffic with the SUV in pursuit, both vehicles trading gunfire while civilians scattered and other cars crashed trying to avoid us. I stayed curled in the footwell, my hands pressed over my ears, my mind refusing to accept that this was real, that people were trying to kill me, that I might die in the back of a Mercedes on a Tuesday morning because I'd needed rabbit skin glue. The car jerked to a stop so suddenly I was thrown forward against the back of Marco's seat. "We're here. Move, move, move." Marco's door flew open and then mine, and his hand closed around my arm, hauling me out of the car. I had a fractured impression of an underground parking garage. Concrete pillars, fluorescent lights, and Dante, emerging from an elevator with 4 more armed men, his face a mask of cold fury I'd never seen before. "Get her inside." His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Marco started dragging me toward the elevator, but the SUV screeched into the garage behind us, doors already opening, men spilling out with weapons raised. Dante moved. I'd seen him move before, the predatory grace that marked him as dangerous. But this was different. This was violence distilled into human form. He had a gun in his hand, though I hadn't seen him draw it, and he fired twice in rapid succession. 2 men from the SUV went down. His own men spread out, taking cover behind concrete pillars, laying down suppressing fire. "Get her out of here." Dante's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. Now. But more men were emerging from the SUV, and one of them had a clear line of sight to where Marco was pulling me toward the elevator. I saw him raise his weapon, saw the barrel align with my chest, saw my death in the deliberate way his finger tightened on the trigger. Dante threw himself between us. The shot went wide, hitting the concrete wall and sending chips of stone flying. Dante fired 3 times, and the shooter dropped. Another man rushed forward, and Dante met him in close quarters, too close for guns. I watched, frozen in horror, as Dante moved with brutal efficiency. A strike to the throat, a twist that I heard break bone. The man crumpled, and Dante was already moving to the next threat. He killed them. 2 more men, both dead before they hit the ground, and it was like watching a force of nature, something inevitable and terrible. His movements were precise, economical, each action designed to end life as quickly as possible. No hesitation, no mercy, just cold calculation and perfect execution. Marco got me to the elevator and shoved me inside, his body blocking mine as he hit a button. The doors started to close, but not before I saw Dante kill a fifth man, saw the spray of blood, saw him turn to check if I was safe. Our eyes met through the narrowing gap of the closing doors, and his face was spattered with red. The elevator rose in silence broken only by my ragged breathing and Marco's calm voice speaking into his phone, reporting the attack, requesting cleanup, arranging security sweeps. I stood against the back wall, shaking so hard my teeth chattered, my mind replaying the last 3 minutes in an endless loop of violence and death. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment I'd never seen before. Sleek, modern, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. Marco ushered me inside, checked every room with his weapon drawn, then positioned himself by the windows overlooking the city. 30 seconds later, the elevator opened again and Dante stepped out. He was covered in blood. It soaked his white shirt, spattered across his face and neck, dripped from his hands. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the expanse of white marble floor. Then he moved, crossing to me in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on me before I could answer, running over my arms, my shoulders, tilting my face up to examine it for injuries. "Did they touch you? Did any of the glass cut you? Talk to me, Isabel." "I'm fine." My voice sounded distant, disconnected. "You're the one covered in blood. It's not mine." He said it like it was obvious, like of course the blood coating him belonged to the men he'd just killed. "Let me see your hands." I looked down and realized my palms were scraped raw from bracing against the car floor, embedded with tiny pieces of safety glass that glittered under the lights. Small cuts, nothing serious, but Dante's face went hard when he saw them. "Marco, secure the perimeter. No one gets up here without my explicit authorization. I want updates every 5 minutes." "Yes, sir." Marco moved toward the elevator, speaking quietly into his phone. Dante took my elbow and guided me deeper into the penthouse, through a living room that could have been featured in an architecture magazine, into a bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. He opened another door, revealing a bathroom done entirely in white marble and chrome. "Sit." He pointed to the edge of a bathtub large enough to swim in. I sat, still shaking, while he moved around the space with focused efficiency. He stripped off his ruined shirt, revealing a torso marked with old scars I'd never seen before. Long, thin lines that looked like knife wounds, a puckered circle on his shoulder that had to be a bullet. Evidence of a life lived in violence that I'd been sheltered from until today. He ran water in the sink, tested the temperature, then wet a white washcloth and brought it back to where I sat. "Give me your hands." I held them out, and he began cleaning the blood and glass from my palms, with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who'd just killed 5 people. His touch was careful, methodical, each movement designed to cause the least pain possible. When he found a piece of glass embedded deep in the meat of my thumb, he murmured an apology before extracting it with tweezers from a first aid kit that appeared from under the sink. "This is your world." The words came out flat, emotionless. Violence and death. People shooting at cars in broad daylight. Bodies in parking garages. And now it's touching me because of you. He didn't stop cleaning my hands, didn't look up from his work. Yes, just that. Yes, acknowledgement without excuse or justification. I felt rage building under the shock, hot and clarifying. "You killed them. I watched you kill them." "Yes. Would you do it again? I'd kill 100 more to keep you breathing." He said it simply, like it was a fact rather than a threat or a promise. Raised his eyes to meet mine, and I saw no regret there, no doubt. Just absolute certainty. "Those men came for you, Isabel. The Calavieras, they're a rival family, who've been trying to move in on our territory for years. Someone told them about your connection to me and to the collection. They thought they could take you, use you as leverage. I would burn the entire city down before I let that happen. The casual way he said it, the complete conviction, should have terrified me. Maybe it did, but it also did something else. Something I didn't want to examine too closely. Some small part of me that had been afraid since my father died, that had felt vulnerable and alone in the world. That part felt something that might have been relief. Stop. I pulled my hands back from his gentle grip. Don't try to make this romantic. Don't pretend you're some kind of protector when you're the reason I'm in danger in the first place. If I'd never met you, if you hadn't bought my debts and forced me into this insane situation, those men wouldn't have been shooting at me. I'm not trying to make anything romantic. Dante stood, tossed the bloody washcloth into the sink, turned to face me fully. I'm stating facts. You were always in danger, Isabel. From the moment your father started working for my family, you became a target. Every rival who wanted to hurt the Vitales, every law enforcement agency investigating us, every opportunist looking for leverage, they all knew about Miguel Moreno and his daughter. The only thing that kept you safe was obscurity and your father's careful management of his double life. When he died, that protection died with him. What are you talking about? I stood too, refusing to let him tower over me, even though he still had 6 inches of height advantage. My father got out. He stopped working for you. That's why you killed him, isn't it? Because he wanted to leave. We didn't kill your father. Dante's voice was hard. And he never stopped working for us. He couldn't. That's not how this works. Once you're in, once you know what you know and have the connections you have, you don't just retire and walk away. He tried. He wanted to give you a clean life, untainted by his choices. But he knew it was impossible, so he did the next best thing. You're lying. I'm not. Dante moved to a wall panel, pressed something that made a section of the wall slide back to reveal a safe. He entered a code, pulled out a folder, handed it to me, read it. My hands were still shaking as I opened the folder. Inside was a contract, legal and binding, dated 6 months before my father's death. An agreement between Miguel Moreno and Antonio Vitale, Dante's father. I skimmed the dense legal language, trying to make sense of it, until I reached a section that made my blood run cold. In exchange for forgiveness of all debts and guaranteed protection of his immediate family, Miguel Moreno agrees to the following terms. 1. Continued consultation on art acquisition and authentication as needed. 2. Transfer of all client contacts and professional relationships to Vitale family interests. 3. The arrangement of a marriage alliance between Isabel Moreno, age 23 at time of signing, and Dante Vitale, age 29 at time of signing, said marriage to take place no later than Isabel Moreno's 26th birthday. The paper slipped from my numb fingers. I was promised to you. Like property, like family, like protection. Dante picked up the contract, held it gently like it was something precious. Your father knew the art world's underbelly would come for you eventually. He knew his association with my family had painted a target on your back that would never fade. So he made a deal, his continued cooperation in exchange for my promise to protect you, to marry you, to bring you fully under the Vitale family's shield where no rival would dare touch you. This is insane. I backed away from him, from the contract, from the implication that my entire life had been negotiated without my knowledge or consent. People don't arrange marriages anymore. This isn't the Middle Ages. You can't just trade daughters like livestock. I'm not trading anything. Dante set the contract on the marble counter, his movements careful, controlled. I'm honoring an agreement made by 2 men who understood the world we live in. Your father loved you, Isabel. Everything he did, every compromise he made, it was to keep you safe, to give you options he never had. Did you love him? The question came out of nowhere, raw and desperate. My father. Did you love him? I respected him. Dante's face softened fractionally, the mask slipping just enough to show something human underneath. He was the only honest criminal I've ever known. He never pretended his work was noble or justified. He knew exactly what he was doing and why, and he lived with the weight of those choices every day. When he came to my father and proposed this arrangement, he was crying. I'd never seen him cry before. He said he couldn't protect you anymore, that he was dying. The car accident was staged. I felt the world tilt under my feet. What? Your father had cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 4. He had maybe 6 months left, and he knew once he was gone, you'd be vulnerable. So he arranged the accident, made it look violent enough that no one would question it, and in dying that way, he sent a message to every family in the business. Miguel Moreno was under Vitale protection. Anyone who touched his family would answer to us. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying. My father's funeral. The closed casket. My mother's insistence that we not ask to see the body, that we remember him as he was. I'd thought it was grief, trauma from the accident. But it was a lie. All of it was a lie designed to protect me. He killed himself. To save you. Dante moved closer, but didn't touch me. He took his own life in a way that looked like enemy action, that reinforced the alliance between our families, that ensured I would be bound by honor and obligation to fulfill his last request, to marry you and keep you safe. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not the refined crying of someone maintaining composure, but ugly, broken sobs that shook my whole body. My father had died to protect me, had arranged my life like pieces on a chessboard, sacrificing himself to ensure I'd be safe even after he was gone. And I'd spent 3 years hating the drunk driver who'd killed him, never knowing there was no drunk driver, that the man I loved had chosen to leave me. Dante caught me when my knees gave out, lowered us both to the floor, and for the first time since I'd met him, he held me without calculation or manipulation. Just held me while I cried for my father, for the life I'd thought I had, for the innocent girl who'd believed her biggest problem was student loans and a struggling business. The panic room, because that's what this penthouse was, a luxurious cage within a cage, felt sterile and cold around us. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making the blood on Dante's skin look black. Outside, I could hear sirens wailing, the city responding to the violence that had erupted in its streets. And inside, I was wrapped in the arms of a killer, a man who'd just ended 5 lives without hesitation, who held me like I was something precious and breakable. Eventually, the sobs subsided into hiccups and shaking. Dante produced a blanket from somewhere and wrapped it around my shoulders, still holding me against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. I hate you. I said it into his shirt, the words muffled. I hate you for this, for all of it. I know. His hand moved through my hair, gentle and soothing. But you're alive to hate me. That's all that matters. The Calavieras, they'll come again, won't they? This won't stop. No. His honesty was brutal. They won't stop until we make them stop. Until we eliminate the threat permanently, which means more violence, more death. Yes. He didn't apologize for it, didn't try to soften the reality, just acknowledged it and held me tighter. I can't do this. I can't live like this, always waiting for the next attack, always wondering if today is the day someone succeeds in killing me. You can. His voice was absolutely certain. You're stronger than you know, Isabel. Your father saw it. I see it. You survived today. You'll survive whatever comes next. Because I'll make sure of it. I pulled back enough to look at his face, to see the blood still spattered across his cheek, the absolute conviction in his dark eyes. This marriage, the arrangement my father made, it's real. You actually intend to go through with it. Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. When? When you're ready. When you understand that it's not a cage but a shield. When you choose it instead of just accepting it. He reached up, brushed a tear from my face with his thumb, and the gesture was so tender it made my chest ache. I told you I'd make you love me, Isabel. I meant it, but I'd rather have your hatred and your life than your love and your death. The sirens outside were getting closer. Marco's voice came through an intercom, reporting that the building was secure, that cleanup crews were handling the bodies, that the police had been managed. The machinery of Dante's world grinding on, turning violence into paperwork, death into problems solved. I sat on the bathroom floor, wrapped in a blanket, held by a man who'd killed for me, who wanted to marry me, who'd bought my father's debts and my future, and expected me to be grateful for the cage he was building. And the terrifying thing, the thing I couldn't admit even to myself, was that some part of me was grateful. Some part of me felt safer in his arms than I'd felt in 3 years. Some part of me was starting to understand why my father had chosen this for me. Outside, the city continued its indifferent existence. Inside, in this sterile white room with blood on the floor and death in the air, something between Dante and me shifted. Not love, not yet. Maybe not ever. But something that acknowledged the reality we were both trapped in, the deal that had been struck before we ever met, the future that was rushing toward us, whether we wanted it or not. You can't make me love you. I repeated the words from our first meeting, but they sounded different now. Less defiant, more desperate. I won't. He held my gaze, unflinching. But I'll keep you alive. I'll honor your father's sacrifice. I'll give you the truth he couldn't. And maybe, someday, that will be enough. It had to be. Because the alternative was death in a parking garage, blood on concrete, becoming another casualty in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. So I let him hold me in the white marble bathroom while the city processed its latest violence. Let him clean the last of the glass from my hands. Let him wrap me in blankets and safety and the promise of protection bought with other people's blood. And I tried not to think about how easily I was accepting it all. Section 5. The Choice and the Surrender. The rain had finally stopped after 3 days of relentless downpour that had kept me trapped inside the estate, working on a damaged Titian while water streaked the windows and thunder rolled across the Hudson Valley like distant artillery. Now the evening air smelled of wet earth and dying roses, and I stood in Dante's study demanding answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. He sat behind a massive desk, carved from what looked like a single piece of walnut, his father's portrait looming on the wall behind him like a disapproving ghost, and between us lay a leather folder that he'd just placed there with the careful reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. I need the truth. My voice was steadier than I felt, strengthened by 4 weeks of living in this beautiful prison, 4 weeks of restoring his stolen collection while he circled around me like I was another piece of art he intended to acquire. All of it. No more hints about my father's death. No more cryptic comments about contracts and obligations. If you want me to stay here, if you want me to continue this work, I need to know why you really brought me here. Dante leaned back in his chair, and the firelight caught the angles of his face, making him look older than his 32 years. The weight of whatever he was about to reveal already visible in the tension around his eyes. All right. No more secrets. He pushed the folder toward me. Open it. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him and pulled the folder close. Inside was a contract, yellowed slightly with age, dated 7 years ago. My hands started trembling before I even began reading. The agreement was laid out in legal language that tried and failed to make something obscene sound reasonable. Miguel Moreno agrees to provide exclusive art acquisition and authentication services to the Vitali family in exchange for the following considerations: a list of financial benefits, protection from rival families, introductions to collectors, and then, on page 3, the clause that made my stomach drop like I'd stepped off a cliff. Upon the occasion of Isabel Moreno reaching her 25th birthday, she will enter into marriage with Dante Vitale, eldest son of Antonio Vitale, thereby uniting both families' interests and ensuring the continuation of their business relationship. Both fathers' signatures at the bottom, my father's familiar scrawl next to Antonio Vitale's angular script. The date. 6 months after my 19th birthday, when I'd been starting my junior year at Columbia, completely unaware that my future was being signed away in a contract that read like something from a medieval dynasty. This is insane. I looked up at Dante, searching his face for some sign that this was another manipulation, another layer of the trap he'd built around me. My father would never. He did. Dante's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Your father was drowning in debt 7 years ago, Isabel. He'd made investments that went bad, owed money to people far more dangerous than me. My father offered him a way out, protection, financial security, a guarantee that you and your mother would be safe no matter what happened in the art world or the criminal underworld. All he had to do was continue working for us and agree to a marriage alliance. I was 19. I was practically a child. You were his future. Dante stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. Your father loved you more than anything in this world. That came through in every journal entry, every conversation I had with him before he died. He made this deal because he believed it was the only way to protect you from the consequences of his choices. He believed I would honor the agreement, that I would treat you well, that you would have a life of comfort and security. And he was going to tell me. The question came out broken. Before he died, he was going to explain all of this. Yes. Dante turned back to face me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. He was planning to tell you everything on your 25th birthday. He was going to give you the choice then, explain the situation, let you decide whether you wanted to honor the contract, but he died 3 months before that birthday, killed by someone in your organization. My voice was hard, accusatory. Killed because he wanted out, because he was having second thoughts about selling his daughter like property. No. Dante moved closer, and I forced myself not to retreat, even though every instinct screamed to put distance between us. He was killed by the Calavieras, a rival family that wanted to destabilize my father's operations. They'd learned about the contract, about your father's role in our art acquisitions. They killed him to send a message and to prevent the alliance our marriage would create. My father died 6 months later, assassinated by the same people. Which left you. I looked down at the contract, at the signatures that bound me to a future I'd never chosen. Which left you to decide whether to enforce this obscene agreement. I could have. He sat on the edge of his desk, close enough that I could see the faint scar through his eyebrow, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. The contract is legally binding in the world I operate in. I could have shown up at your apartment the day you turned 25, explained the situation, and demanded you fulfill your father's obligation. Instead, I waited. I watched you build your business, struggle and fail and rebuild. I gave you time to become the woman you are now instead of the girl your father promised me. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. If you had this contract, if you could have just claimed me, why go through all the elaborate manipulation with the auction and the debt and bringing me here? Because I don't want a terrified bride. Dante's voice dropped lower, intimate and intense. I don't want a woman who comes to me because she has no choice, who looks at me with hatred every morning and counts the days until she can escape. I want you to choose this, Isabel. I want you to choose me. You can't make me love you. I heard myself repeat the words I'd thrown at him in the gallery 4 weeks ago, but this time they came out differently. Quieter, less certain, almost like a question. No. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement so I could pull away if I wanted, and brushed a strand of hair back from my face. His fingers were warm against my cheek, gentle in a way that made my breath catch. I can't make you love me, but I can make you safe. I can give you resources to create art conservation programs that actually matter, to teach the next generation, to restore pieces that would otherwise be lost to time. I can give you the truth about your father's death, about who killed him and why. I can give you a life where you never have to worry about money or security or whether you'll lose everything you've built. And maybe, in time, you'll choose to give me something in return. What if I don't? My voice was shaking now, my heart hammering against my ribs. What if I can't ever give you what you want? Then you can't. His hand dropped away from my face, and I felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. I'm not going to force this, Isabel. I'm not going to keep you here against your will and pretend that's a marriage. So I'm giving you a choice, a real choice. He stood and walked back to the window, giving me space, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that terrified me. You can leave. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you want. I'll forgive all your debts, personal and professional. I'll set up a trust fund for your mother so she never has to worry about money. I'll assign security to watch over both of you from a distance. Make sure the Calavieras or anyone else never touches you. You walk away, return to your life, rebuild your business however you want. The contract becomes void. But I knew there had to be a condition, some trap hidden in this offer of freedom. But you'll never see me again. He said it simply, like he was discussing the weather rather than cutting off all contact. If you leave, that's it. No more encounters at galleries, no more phone calls, no more anything. You go back to your world, and I stay in mine. We become strangers who once knew each other. That's the price of your freedom. I stared at his back, at the tension visible in his shoulders, and tried to process what he was offering. True freedom. A chance to walk away from all of this, from the stolen art and the violence and the impossible situation my father had trapped me in. A chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, without debt or obligation or a contract signed before I was old enough to understand what love actually meant. So why did the thought of never seeing him again feel like losing something vital? This is emotional manipulation. I stood, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy crackling through my body. You're offering me freedom while making it sound like a punishment. You're trying to make me choose to stay by making leaving seem unbearable. Am I? He turned to face me, and his expression was more open than I'd ever seen it, vulnerable in a way that made him seem younger and infinitely more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. Or am I just being honest about what I want? I've wanted you since I saw you at your father's funeral 3 years ago, standing by his grave in a black dress that was too big for you because you'd lost weight from grief. You were crying, but you were also angry, furious at the universe for taking him, and you threw a rose at his headstone so hard the petals exploded. I stood 50 yards away, paying my respects to a man who'd worked for my family, and I watched you rage against death itself. That's when I knew. The confession hit me like a physical blow. You were at the funeral. I never saw you. You weren't supposed to. I kept my distance because you were grieving and because the contract said you wouldn't be mine for another 3 months. And then your father's killer struck again, and my father died, and everything became complicated. I spent 3 years building my power base, eliminating rivals, making myself strong enough to protect you the way both our fathers wanted. And yes, I manipulated circumstances to bring you here. Yes, I used your debt and your father's secrets to trap you. But I'm done with manipulation, Isabel. I'm giving you the truth and a genuine choice. Stay or go. But decide based on what you actually want, not what you think you should want. What I want. I laughed, the sound bitter and broken. I want my father back. I want to unknow everything I've learned about him. I want to wake up and discover this is all some elaborate nightmare. I want a life that makes sense. You can't have any of that. His honesty was brutal and somehow comforting, but you can have safety, purpose, the resources to do work that matters. And maybe, if you're willing to risk it, you can have someone who sees you completely and wants you anyway. I thought about the past 4 weeks, about the way Dante appeared in my studio at odd hours to watch me work, never interrupting but always present. The way he'd started leaving books about art history on my nightstand, rare volumes I'd mentioned wanting to read. The way his hand had steadied mine when my tremor got bad. His touch gentle despite the violence I knew those hands were capable of. The way he listened when I talked about my father, never trying to defend Miguel's choices, but never condemning them either. And I thought about the alternative. Returning to my studio apartment, to the constant anxiety about money, to looking over my shoulder wondering when the Calavieras might decide I knew too much. Building a life alone, always wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to stay. You said I have 24 hours. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the fire crackling in the hearth. To decide. Yes. Dante moved toward the door, and I realized he was leaving, giving me space to think without his presence clouding my judgment. 24 hours, and then, whatever you choose, I'll honor it. No more manipulation, no more threats. Just your decision, and my acceptance of it. What if I walk away and realize I made a mistake? The question escaped before I could stop it, revealing more than I wanted to admit. What if I choose freedom, and then discover it's not what I actually wanted? Then you come back. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. The door is always open for you, Isabel. Today, next week, 10 years from now. If you walk away and change your mind, you come back and I'll be here. That's my promise. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and I stood alone in his study surrounded by the weight of impossible choices. The fire popped and settled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside the window, the estate grounds stretched into darkness, manicured and controlled and utterly artificial. I picked up the contract, read through it again, seeing my father's signature with new eyes. He'd been trying to protect me the only way he knew how, making deals with dangerous men because he believed it would keep me safe. He'd been wrong about so many things, but maybe not about this. Maybe not about Dante. I left the study and walked through the darkened house, past Mrs. Chen, who nodded respectfully but didn't try to stop me, out into the garden where late-blooming roses released their fragrance into the October night. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath, and overhead stars pierced through the light pollution from the city, distant and indifferent to human complications. The fountain at the center of the garden trickled softly, Neptune frozen in eternal combat with his serpent, and I sat on the stone bench nearby and tried to imagine both futures. Freedom meant returning to struggle and uncertainty, but it also meant autonomy, the ability to make my own choices without the weight of contracts and family obligations. It meant possibly meeting someone I could love without the complication of violence and stolen art and fathers who'd made deals that bound their children. It meant a clean break from this world that had already cost my father his life. But staying meant safety and resources and purpose. It meant solving the mystery of my father's death, understanding the full truth of who he'd been. It meant preserving masterpieces that would otherwise deteriorate in storage, doing work that actually mattered. And it meant Dante. Complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle Dante, who watched me work like I was creating miracles instead of just cleaning old paint. Who steadied my trembling hands and left books on my nightstand and offered me freedom when he could have simply taken what the contract promised. Who looked at me like I was the most valuable piece in his collection, irreplaceable and precious. I sat in the garden for hours, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the temperature drop as midnight approached. My phone, still useless for outside communication, showed the time ticking past 1, then 2. I thought about my mother, safe in her house that my father's blood money had bought, who would be protected either way. I thought about my studio apartment, cramped and cold and mine. I thought about Dante's study, warm and intimate and full of secrets I was only beginning to understand. And I thought about the choice itself, the fact that he'd given me one when he could have simply enforced the contract. That gesture, that acknowledgement of my autonomy, even when he held all the power, told me more about who he was than anything else he'd done. I couldn't make myself love him. He was right about that. Love couldn't be forced or manipulated or bought with safety and resources. But maybe it could grow, slowly and carefully, between two people who'd been bound together by their father's choices, but who chose each other anyway. Maybe it could develop from shared grief and mutual respect and the intimate knowledge that comes from truly seeing another person. Maybe I was already halfway there and too scared to admit it. The fountain continued its endless cycle, water falling and rising and falling again. Neptune fought his battle, frozen in stone, neither winning nor losing, but simply existing in eternal struggle. And I sat in the cold October night, wrapped in impossible choices, and tried to figure out which future terrified me more. Leaving and spending the rest of my life wondering what if, or staying and risking my heart on a man who'd already proven he could break me in a dozen different ways. 24 hours. I had until tomorrow night to decide. But sitting, there in the garden, feeling the weight of the choice settle into my bones, I suspected I already knew what my answer would be. I just had to find the courage to say it out loud. Okay. Section 6. The Revelation and the Price of Truth. I found Dante in his private library at midnight, surrounded by his father's papers and my father's journals, the lamplight creating pools of amber warmth in a room that felt like it existed outside of time. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression told me he'd been expecting me, that perhaps he'd been waiting hours for me to make this exact choice. The library was extraordinary, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves accessed by rolling ladders, filled with what I recognized as first editions and rare manuscripts, the kind of collection that should have been in a museum, but instead lived in the private domain of a man who collected beautiful things the way other people collected stamps. The air smelled of old leather and aged paper and that cedar and citrus cologne I'd come to associate with him, a scent that now made my pulse quicken in ways I refused to examine too closely. Rain had started falling outside, fat drops that splattered against the tall windows, and distant thunder rumbled like the earth clearing its throat. I stayed. My voice came out steadier than I expected, given that my heart was hammering against my ribs. But I have conditions. He leaned back in his chair, a heavy piece of furniture that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany sometime in the 18th century, and gestured for me to continue. I'm listening. I don't marry you. Not yet. Not until I've had time to understand what that would mean, what your world really is, what I'd be agreeing to beyond just a legal contract. I walked deeper into the library, past shelves lined with books in Italian and Latin, and languages I couldn't identify. I'll stay here. I'll complete the restoration work. I'll learn about your business, your family, your life. And at the end of that time, I'll decide whether I can live with being your wife. If I decide I can't, you let me go. No threats, no destroying my father's reputation, no blackmail. You just let me walk away. And if you decide you can. His eyes followed my movement with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. Then I marry you because I choose to, not because I'm forced to. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain and the distant thunder growing closer. I half expected him to refuse, to tell me the deal was marriage or nothing, that he didn't have time for trial periods and negotiations. Instead, he stood and crossed to a side table where a crystal decanter of whiskey caught the lamplight. He poured 2 glasses, neat, and held one out to me. Agreed. I took the glass, our fingers brushing in the exchange, and that simple contact sent electricity up my arm. You're agreeing. Just like that. Just like that. He raised his glass in a small salute. I told you before, Isabel. I don't want a terrified bride. I want you to choose this. Choose me. If it takes time for you to get there, I have time. The use of my first name, not Miss Moreno, felt significant. I sipped the whiskey, felt it burn down my throat, warming me from the inside. Why? Why does it matter so much that I choose it? Why not just force the issue? You have all the power here. Because forced loyalty is worthless. He drank, his eyes never leaving mine over the rim of the glass. Because I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who smile to my face and plot behind my back. People who want what I have, who see me as a stepping stone to power or wealth or status. You're the first person in years who wants nothing from me, who looks at me with honest hatred instead of calculated flattery. It's refreshing. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. You find it refreshing that I hate you. I find it honest. And honesty in my world is rarer than any painting in that gallery. He set his glass down and moved to the mahogany table where papers were spread in careful arrangement. Besides, you don't hate me as much as you think you do. Or you wouldn't be here right now. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But the words wouldn't come because somewhere in the past weeks, in the quiet moments of working side by side and the conversations over dinner, I'd stopped refusing, and the way he'd looked at me when I'd decoded that first reference to Botticelli's Primavera, something had shifted. I didn't love him. I couldn't love him. But I didn't hate him either, not anymore, and that realization was terrifying in its implications. I came because I want answers. I gestured to the papers on the table. You said you'd tell me what really happened to my father. You said his death wasn't an accident. So tell me. Tell me the truth. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of risks and benefits. Then he nodded, as if coming to some internal decision. Sit down. This is going to take a while. I pulled out a chair across from him, the table between us covered with documents and photographs, and my father's journals open to pages I'd read so many times I'd memorized the words. Dante sat as well, and in the lamplight, with the storm building outside, he looked younger somehow, less like the untouchable Mafia boss, and more like a man carrying burdens too heavy for one person. Your father discovered something 3 years ago. Someone inside the Vitale organization was selling information to our rivals, the Calabrese family, locations of shipments, names of associates, details about our business operations, the kind of information that was getting people killed. My father's people. He picked up a photograph, slid it across the table to me. It showed 2 men in what looked like a restaurant, heads close together in conversation. One I didn't recognize. The other made my breath catch. My father, alive and animated in a way I'd almost forgotten he could be. Your father was asked to investigate because he had access to both families through his art dealing. He was trusted by people who didn't trust anyone else. And he found something. Evidence that the traitor was someone high up in our organization, someone close to my father. Before he could deliver his findings, he died. The car accident. I touched the photograph with trembling fingers, tracing the outline of my father's face. It wasn't an accident. No. Dante's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. The brake lines were cut. The investigation was controlled by people on our payroll who made sure it looked like mechanical failure. Your father knew he was in danger. He left evidence behind, encrypted in a way he knew only certain people could decode. But I haven't been able to crack it. Not in 3 years of trying. Why not? Because he encrypted it using art history references, paintings, artists, techniques that only someone with deep knowledge of Renaissance art would understand. Someone like him. Dante looked at me steadily. Or someone like you. my hand stilled on the photograph. You think I can decode what my father left behind? I know you can. He pulled a leather folder from the stack of papers and opened it, revealing pages covered in my father's handwriting. But instead of the clear entries from his journals, these were filled with what looked like nonsense. References to paintings and artists jumbled together with numbers and seemingly random words. I've had cryptographers look at this, linguistics experts, art historians who owe me favors. No one can make sense of it. But you have your father's training, his way of seeing connections between pieces. If anyone can decode this, it's you. I pulled the folder closer, my restoration work temporarily forgotten in the face of this new puzzle. My father had always loved codes and hidden meanings, had taught me to see the stories within stories in paintings, the symbolic language artists use to communicate dangerous ideas. When I was 12, he'd spent an entire summer teaching me to read the iconography in Botticelli's Primavera, showing me how every flower and gesture carried meaning that the casual viewer would miss. If he'd left a coded message, he would have used the language we'd shared, the private communication of art and symbol that had been our bond. Show me everything you have. I looked up at Dante, and something passed between us, an understanding that this was bigger than our personal conflict. This is about finding who killed him. Who killed your father, too? Yes. Dante's jaw tightened. 3 years ago, my father was assassinated. Shot in his own home by someone who knew our security, who knew exactly when and where he'd be vulnerable. The same person who betrayed your father is the one who killed mine. I'm certain of it. Then we find them. The words came out fierce, determined. We decode whatever my father left behind, and we find the person who took them both from us. He nodded, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something like relief in his expression. Together. We worked through the night, the storm building outside until lightning flashed through the windows and thunder shook the old house's foundations. I spread my father's coded pages across the table, cross-referencing them with art history books Dante pulled from the shelves, looking for patterns and connections. The first breakthrough came around 2 in the morning, when I realized that the seemingly random numbers corresponded to catalog entries in the Uffizi Gallery's collection. The second came an hour later, when I understood that the artists' names weren't just names but anagrams that spelled out locations. Milano, Napoli, Venezia. We're getting somewhere. Dante leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, smell his cologne mixed with the whiskey we'd been drinking. What do the locations mean? I think they're meeting places, or sites of transactions. I pointed to a string of texts that mentioned Caravaggio's Calling of St. Matthew. This painting shows Matthew at a table with tax collectors. My father always said Caravaggio was painting the moment of choice, when Matthew had to decide between his old life and following Christ. What if he's using it to indicate someone who made a choice? Someone who chose to betray? Dante went very still. Keep going. I worked faster now, the code unraveling like thread pulled from a tapestry. Each painting reference revealed another layer, another piece of information. Raphael's School of Athens pointed to a date. Titian's Venus of Urbino indicated a monetary amount. Michelangelo's David, always my father's favorite sculpture, appeared again and again, and I knew it had to mean something important. David was a symbol of the underdog defeating the powerful, of courage against impossible odds, of... I stopped, my pen hovering over the page. Oh, God. What? Dante moved closer, reading over my shoulder. What did you find? David defeated Goliath, a giant. Someone powerful brought down by someone smaller, someone no one suspected. I looked up at him, and I saw him understand at the same moment I did. The traitor isn't someone obvious. It's someone who seemed insignificant. Someone your father trusted completely. Someone who had access to everything because no one thought to suspect them. We worked faster after that. the pieces falling into place with increasing speed. The storm reached its peak, lightning turning the library bright as day for frozen moments, thunder so loud it rattled the windows in their frames. But we barely noticed, lost in the puzzle my father had left behind, the final gift he'd given me even in death. A way to find his killer. A way to find the truth. At 4 in the morning, we cracked the final code. The name emerged from the jumbled references like a picture coming into focus. And when I wrote it down, Dante's face went pale. Luca Vitali. I watched him process it. Your cousin. Yes. He sat back heavily in his chair, looking like I'd struck him. Luca. My second in command. The person I trusted more than anyone except. He didn't finish, but I understood. The person he'd trusted like family had betrayed him, had killed both our fathers, had been working against him for years. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. I know what it's like to have someone you love turn out to be different than you thought. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw grief and rage and something else in his eyes. Something that looked like recognition. Your father wrote about you in his journals. Did you know that? In the later ones, after he started trying to find a way out. He said that Dante will protect her when I can't. He's ruthless, but he honors his word. He chose you for me, Isabel. Not because of some business arrangement, but because he believed you were the only person in our world who would keep me safe. The revelation settled over me like a weight. My father had chosen this. Had chosen Dante for me. Had seen something in him worth trusting with his daughter's future. It didn't absolve the manipulation, didn't erase the coercion, but it complicated everything I'd believed about how I'd ended up here. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching mine. I've been alone since I was 28, since my father died, and I realized everyone around me was either afraid of me or trying to use me. 4 years of isolation, of never being able to trust anyone, of knowing that showing weakness would get me killed, and then you showed up, furious and defiant, refusing to be bought or intimidated. You're the first person who wants nothing from me except the truth. The first person I've wanted to trust in years. I looked at our hands, almost touching on the table. I'm staying because I need to know the truth. About my father. About yours. About who did this to them. And because. I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit what I was beginning to feel. But when I looked up, I saw that he understood anyway. I know. His fingers closed over mine, warm and careful. I know. The touch sent electricity through me, the same awareness I'd been fighting for weeks now, but this time I didn't pull away. This time, when he stood and moved around the table toward me, I stood too. When he cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses I could feel against my skin, I didn't step back. When he leaned down, giving me every opportunity to refuse, I tilted my face up to meet him. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected possession, domination, the same control he wielded over everything else in his life. Instead, it was tentative, almost questioning. His lips soft against mine as if he was afraid I'd disappear if he pushed too hard. I felt the tremor in his hands where they cradled my face, felt the way his breath caught when I kissed him back, and realized with sudden clarity that he was as affected by this as I was. That whatever power dynamic existed between us, in this moment we were just two people who'd lost too much finding something in each other. I deepened the kiss, my hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. He made a sound low in his throat, part surprise and part relief, and then his arms were around me, holding me against him like I was something precious he'd thought he'd lost. Years of grief and loneliness poured into that kiss, his and mine tangled together until I couldn't tell where my pain ended and his began. The storm raged outside, lightning illuminating us in flashes, but in here, wrapped in his arms with the scent of old books and rain, and him surrounding me, I felt safe for the first time since my father died. When I finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard, both shaken. His forehead rested against mine, his hands still gentle on my face, and in the lamplight I could see emotions flickering across his features too fast to name. "This doesn't mean I love you." My voice came out whisper soft, but I needed to say it, needed to maintain some boundary even as I felt them all crumbling. "Not yet." The words were half promise, half acknowledgement, and when he smiled, it transformed his face from harsh beauty into something that made my heart stutter in my chest. "I can work with not yet." He kissed me again, softer this time, sweeter, and I tasted the future in it. The possibility that this forced arrangement might become something real. That the man I'd hated might become someone I chose. That not yet might eventually become yes. Outside, the storm began to fade, thunder growing distant, rain softening to a steady patter against the windows. Inside, surrounded by my father's secrets and the truth we'd uncovered together, I let myself lean into Dante's embrace and imagine a future where I wasn't his prisoner, but his partner. Where the choice he'd given me might be one I'd actually want to make. We spent the rest of the night in the library, sometimes working on the remaining codes, sometimes just talking. He told me about his father, about growing up knowing he'd inherit an empire built on violence and secrecy, about the loneliness of never being able to trust anyone's motives. I told him about my mother, about the guilt I felt keeping my father's secrets from her, about the fear that I was becoming someone she wouldn't recognize. And as dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the windows, as the storm gave way to clear October morning, I realized something that both terrified and exhilarated me. I was falling for him. Not because he'd forced me, not because I had no choice, but because somewhere between the hatred and the partnership, between the coercion and the honesty, I'd started to see the man behind the monster. Started to understand that he was as trapped by his circumstances as I was by mine. That we were both prisoners of our father's choices, trying to find freedom in a world that offered none. And maybe, just maybe, we could find it together. "Not yet," I'd told him. But as he pulled me close again, as he kissed me with a tenderness that made my breath catch, I thought that not yet was already starting to feel like soon. Section 7. The Traitor Revealed and the Choice of Love. The final piece of the puzzle came to me at 3 in the morning, the way revelations often do when your mind has exhausted itself, chasing dead ends, and finally stumbles onto the path that was there all along. I sat in the library surrounded by my father's journals and the encrypted files Dante had given me. Renaissance art books spread across the mahogany table like a paper archipelago, and suddenly the pattern clicked into focus with a clarity that made my hands shake. Every reference my father had made to the Judas figure in paintings, every seemingly random notation about betrayal in biblical art, every mention of family dynamics in his later entries, they all pointed to one name hidden in plain sight throughout the coded passages. Luca Vitale. Dante's cousin, his second in command, the man who'd been present at nearly every meeting I'd attended over the past months, always watching with eyes that assessed and calculated and resented. I grabbed my phone, forgetting for a moment that it was the middle of the night, forgetting everything except the urgency of what I'd discovered, and called Dante. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour, and I realized he probably slept as little as I did these days, both of us haunted by our father's ghosts and the mystery that connected them. "I know who it is." My voice came out breathless, excited, terrified. "The traitor. I know who killed our fathers. I'm coming to you. Stay where you are." He was already moving. I could hear it in the background, footsteps on marble, a door opening. "Don't go anywhere until I get there." But I was already gathering the journals, already organizing the evidence that proved what I'd found. Dante arrived within minutes, wearing sleep pants and nothing else, his hair disheveled and his face tight with an urgency that matched my own. He'd clearly run from his wing of the estate, and the intimacy of seeing him like this, unguarded and vulnerable in a way he never allowed during daylight hours, made my heart skip in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the revelation I was about to share. "Show me." He sat beside me at the table, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell the scent that was purely him beneath the expensive cologne he wore during the day. I pointed to the passages I'd marked, walked him through the pattern I'd identified, watched his face grow progressively darker as he understood what I was showing him. "Luca." His voice was flat, emotionless, but I'd learned to read the subtle signs of his rage. The way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled into fists against the table, the way something dangerous and cold settled behind his eyes. "My own cousin, your father suspected him." I tapped one of the later journal entries, dated 2 weeks before my father's death. He didn't have proof yet, but he was close. "Look at this entry." He references a conversation with your father about bloodlines and loyalty, about how sometimes the greatest threat comes from within the family. And here, he specifically mentions that someone close to the inner circle was asking too many questions about shipment routes and buyer identities. Dante read the passage, his finger tracing my father's handwriting with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence I could feel building in him. "And Luca would have known your father was getting suspicious. Would have known that if Miguel told my father, the investigation would have led straight back to him. So he eliminated the threat, staged the car accident, made it look like bad weather and driver error. Then 6 months later, when your father started asking his own questions, the Calavieras killed him. Or made it look like they did." Dante stood abruptly, began pacing the length of the library like a caged predator. But Luca arranged it. Luca, who I trusted with everything. Luca, who stood beside me at my father's funeral and swore loyalty to the family. I reached for his hand as he passed, caught it, held on until he stopped moving and looked down at me. "What are you going to do?" What I should have done the moment I suspected there was a traitor. He pulled his hand free, but gently, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over our months together. "I'm going to confront him, get a confession, and then I'm going to make sure he pays for what he did to our fathers." I stood, faced him across the scattered evidence of betrayal. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. This is family business, dangerous business. I'm not letting you anywhere near it. Your father was my family." My voice was steady, certain. "And you're—" I stopped, the words catching in my throat because I wasn't sure I was ready to say what I felt, wasn't sure naming it wouldn't make me more vulnerable than I could afford to be. "You matter to me. I want to be there when you face him." For a long moment, Dante simply looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression, some wall coming down that he'd maintained between us, despite the growing intimacy of our investigation and our proximity. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "You stay behind me. You don't engage. If anything happens, you run. Do you understand?" "I understand." But I wasn't sure I meant it. Wasn't sure I wouldn't do something reckless if it meant protecting him the way he'd been protecting me since this whole thing started. We waited until morning, until the household was awake, and Luca would be in his usual place overseeing the estate's security operations. Dante made calls, subtle repositioning of his most trusted men, creating a net around Luca without alerting him that anything had changed. I dressed carefully, practical clothes that wouldn't restrict movement, and found myself thinking of the self-defense techniques Dante had insisted on teaching me over the past weeks. At the time, I'd thought it was just another way of controlling me, keeping me busy. But now I wondered if some part of him had anticipated this moment, had known that eventually the danger would come close enough to touch. We found Luca in the gallery, which felt like poetry of the darkest kind. The same room where I'd first learned the truth about my father, where I'd thrown a picture frame at Dante's head and begun the slow transformation from captive to collaborator to something far more complicated. Luca stood examining one of the restored paintings, a Titian Venus that I'd spent 3 weeks carefully cleaning and stabilizing, and he smiled when we entered like nothing in the world was wrong. Dante, Isabel, you're both up early. He checked his watch, a platinum Rolex that probably cost more than my old studio apartment. Is everything all right? We need to talk. Dante's voice was carefully neutral, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, could see the subtle positioning of his body between me and his cousin. About what? About loyalty. About betrayal. About two men who died because someone they trusted sold them out to their enemies. I watched the blood drain from Luca's face, watched his hand drift toward the gun I knew he carried in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Watched the exact moment he realized we knew, and decided that survival meant violence. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice was steady, but his eyes had gone cold and calculating. If you're accusing me of something, Dante, you'd better have proof. I stepped forward, holding up my father's journal. We have proof. Dates, times, encrypted references that all point to you. You were feeding information to the Calavieras. You arranged Miguel Moreno's death when he got too close to figuring it out. And then you killed your own uncle when he started asking the same questions. Luca's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. Clever girl. I always said you were too smart for your own good, just like your father. He pulled his gun in one smooth motion, pointing it directly at my chest, and I heard Dante's sharp intake of breath beside me. You always got everything. Luca's voice rose, years of resentment finally finding expression. Your father's love, the family's respect, the best assignments, the biggest share of the profits. I worked just as hard, was just as loyal, but I was always second. Always the cousin, never the heir. And then you bring her here, this outsider, and I can see it in your face. You love her, even someone who should mean nothing. She matters more to you than I ever did. Put the gun down. Dante's voice was deadly quiet. This doesn't have to end badly. You can walk away, disappear. I'll give you that much for the years we were family. Walk away. Luca shook his head. You think the Calavieras will let me walk away after I failed to deliver them your entire operation? You think I have anywhere to go that's safe from either you or them? No. My only chance is trading her to them. They want to hurt you, and taking your woman will accomplish that beautifully. He grabbed my arm before I could react, yanked me against him with the gun pressed to my temple. The metal was cold against my skin, and I felt fear spike through me sharp and clarifying. But beneath the fear was something else, something I'd learned from Dante over our months together. Violence had patterns, desperation had weaknesses, and I wasn't the helpless victim I'd been the night we met. Let her go. Dante's voice had gone flat, empty of everything except a threat so profound it seemed to darken the air around him. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, it ends badly for you. Take her, and you're a dead man. I'm already a dead man. Luca started backing toward the door, dragging me with him. But at least this way, I'll live long enough to see you suffer. The calculations ran through my mind with crystal clarity. Luca's grip on my arm was tight, but his focus was divided between me and Dante. The gun at my temple meant his arm was extended, creating an angle I could exploit. Dante had taught me this exact scenario, had made me practice the movements until they were muscle memory. I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I understood he'd been preparing me for exactly this moment. I'm sorry. I said it to Dante, saw his eyes widen with understanding a split second before I moved. I dropped my weight suddenly, turning into Luca's body instead of away from it, using the momentum to knock his gun arm up and away from my head. The weapon discharged, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and I heard glass shatter as the bullet hit one of the protective cases. Then everything happened at once. Dante rushed forward with speed that seemed impossible for someone his size. Luca tried to bring the gun back around, his face contorted with rage and desperation. I drove my elbow back into his ribs the way I'd been taught, felt the satisfying impact of bone on bone. The gallery doors burst open, and Dante's security team flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. And through it all, I heard Luca's voice, bitter and broken. I was invisible. I was always invisible. Another gunshot, this one not from Luca's weapon. I saw his body jerk, saw blood bloom across his chest, saw him fall. The whole thing had lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. Like time had stretched and distorted around the violence, until I couldn't tell which moments were real and which were the product of my adrenaline-soaked brain trying to process trauma too quickly. Then Dante's arms were around me, crushing me against his chest with enough force to hurt, and I realized I was shaking, my entire body vibrating with aftershocks of fear and exertion. His hands moved over me frantically, checking for injuries, his voice rough and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? Tell me you're all right." "I'm fine." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm okay. He's—" I looked past Dante to where Luca lay motionless on the floor, his blood spreading across the polished hardwood in a pool that reflected the track lighting like a dark mirror. "Is he dead?" One of the security team confirmed it, and Dante nodded once, sharp and final. "Get him out of here. Clean this up. I want no trace of this by tonight." The men moved with efficient brutality, and I turned my face into Dante's chest, not wanting to watch as they dealt with the body of a man who'd been family, who'd let resentment and ambition curdle into murder. Dante's arms tightened around me, and I felt him shaking too, fine tremors running through his muscles despite his outward control. "I thought I'd lost you." His voice was muffled against my hair. "When he put that gun to your head, when I saw my own failure to protect you, I—" He pulled back enough to look at my face, and his eyes were raw with an emotion I'd never seen in them before. "If he'd hurt you, none of this would have mattered. Not the empire, not the revenge, not any of it. You're all that matters." The words hung between us, weighted with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. But before I could respond, he continued, the dam of his carefully maintained control finally breaking. "I love you." I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But somewhere between forcing you here and watching you decode my father's secrets, between seeing you furious and seeing you brilliant, I fell completely in love with you. And I know you probably hate me, know you have every right to hate me, but I need you to know that if anything had happened to you, His voice broke, and I realized with shock that Dante Vitale, the man who'd bought my debts and blackmailed me into servitude and orchestrated my entire life with cold precision, was crying. Not sobbing, but tears sliding down his face while he held me like I was the only thing anchoring him to earth. I reached up, touched his face, traced the path of tears with trembling fingers. "I didn't want to love you." My own voice was unsteady, thick with emotions I'd been denying for months. I fought it so hard. "You were my captor, my blackmailer, the man who shattered my understanding of my father. I should hate you. I tried to hate you. But you made it impossible. You let me grieve. You shared your own grief. You taught me to see the beauty in preservation, even when everything felt broken. You protected me. You trusted me. And somewhere in all of that, I stopped seeing you as the enemy and started seeing you as— As what? His hands cupped my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. As the person I want to spend my life with. The confession came out quiet but certain, and I saw his expression transform, hope and wonder and love so intense it hurt to witness. I love you too. I said it clearly this time, no hesitation, no doubt. I love you, Dante Vitale, and I choose you. Not because you bought my debts or threatened my father's legacy, but because you earned it. Because you let me see the man beneath the monster everyone else sees. He kissed me then, desperate and reverent, like I was something precious he'd thought lost and found again. The gallery faded around us, the stolen paintings and the blood being cleaned from the floor, and the violence that had just occurred, all of it dissolved into irrelevance against the reality of this moment. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. Marry me. It wasn't the proposal I might have imagined back when I believed in fairy tales and romance, unburdened by complicated histories. No ring, no planning, just a raw plea from a man who'd nearly lost everything. Marry me because you want to, not because of any contract our fathers made. Marry me because you love me the way I love you. Yes. I didn't need to think about it. Didn't need time to consider. The choice was already made. Had been made somewhere in the weeks of working side by side, solving mysteries together, learning to trust despite every reason not to. Yes, I'll marry you. 6 months later, I stood in the estate's garden wearing a simple ivory dress that caught the late afternoon light and turned it gold. The garden had transformed with spring, tulips and daffodils replacing the autumn roses, new life emerging from ground that had seemed dead through the winter months. My mother sat in the front row, healthy and whole, and blissfully ignorant of the darkness that had shadowed the past year. Dante had kept his word about protecting her, and when I'd finally told her I was marrying him, she'd cried with happiness and said she could see in my eyes that this was real love, not obligation. The ceremony was small, just family, and the few people we trusted completely. No mob connections, no business associates, just the people who mattered. The officiant, a judge who owed Dante more favors than I wanted to know about, stood before us with an expression of genuine warmth as he guided us through the traditional vows. But when it came time for our personal words, I looked up at Dante and felt my heart expand with a love so profound it seemed impossible that I'd once hated this man. You can't make me love you. I said it with a smile, echoing our first confrontation in the Rothschild Gallery, when I'd thrown those words at him like a weapon and he'd accepted the challenge. His own smile was brilliant, transforming his face into something almost boyish, despite the silver threading through his dark hair. I don't have to. His voice was soft, meant only for me, even though everyone could hear. You already do. I already did, I corrected, and kissed him before the officiant could pronounce us married, because some things couldn't wait for permission or proper timing. The small crowd laughed, applause breaking out as Dante pulled me closer and deepened the kiss, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From captive to collaborator to lover to wife, from hating him to understanding him to loving him with everything I was. The stolen paintings in the gallery had been returned anonymously to their rightful owners over the past months. Dante had decided that some legacies weren't worth maintaining, that building something new mattered more than preserving his father's empire of beautiful theft. He'd kept only the pieces that had legitimate provenance, had turned the rest of the estate into something almost respectable. Almost. There were still shadows in our history, still questions I'd probably never have complete answers to, still the reality that we'd both been shaped by our father's choices in ways we couldn't fully escape. But we'd chosen each other despite and because of all of it, had built something real from the ashes of forced proximity and unwilling attraction. As the sun set over the Hudson Valley, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I danced with my husband in the garden, while my mother watched with tears of joy and the spring flowers bloomed around us, like promises of renewal. You know what the best part is, Dante murmured against my ear as we swayed to music played by a string quartet. What? That I get to spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. You don't have to prove anything. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You already did. When you let me choose freely, when you released my debts and told me I could walk away, when you risked everything to give me agency instead of just taking what you wanted. That was when I knew. That was when I understood that love can't be forced, but it can be earned. And you earned mine. He kissed me again, gentle and deep, and I tasted salt and realized one of us was crying. Maybe both of us. Maybe it didn't matter, because this was joy, pure and uncomplicated, despite our complicated history. The party continued around us, celebration and laughter and the clinking of glasses toasting our future. But I was only aware of Dante, of his arms around me, of the steady beat of his heart against mine, of the way he looked at me like I was the masterpiece he'd spent his whole life trying to find. Watch me, he'd said that first night, when I'd told him he couldn't make me love him. And I had watched him be ruthless and gentle, watched him grieve and protect, watched him choose honor over expedience, watched him become someone worthy of the love I'd fought so hard not to feel. The gardens faded into twilight, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow we'd leave for our honeymoon, 2 weeks in Italy visiting the museums and galleries where the paintings we'd restored now hung in public view instead of private hoarding. Tomorrow we'd begin the next chapter of our story, whatever that looked like. But tonight, I danced with my husband in the garden where spring bloomed eternal, and knew with absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth transforming from captive to partner to find. Love couldn't be forced, but oh, how beautifully it could be earned. And we'd earned each other, through fire and betrayal and the long, slow process of learning to trust. The music swelled, the night deepened, and I held tight to the man who'd bought my debts and stolen my heart and given me back my choice. The man who'd watched me until I chose to watch him back, until watching became wanting, became loving, became this, forever, chosen freely and held close. You can't make me love you, I'd said, and he'd replied, watch me. But the truth, the beautiful truth I'd discovered through months of proximity and partnership, and finally admitting what I felt, was simpler than either of us had known that first night. He didn't have to make me love him. I already did.